The South African government is slowly taking shape following the May polls. Now, this month, elected members from political parties who won seats in Parliament were sworn in as members of Parliament. Our focus today are young MPs under the age of 35 and young people, as they make up more than 2/3 of the population of the country. To unpack this further, 2 MPs under the age of 35 join us on Teams now. That's from the EFF and Member of Parliament Sharon Letlape, as well as from the ANC Youth League, NEC, and Member of Parliament Lufefe Mkutu. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. First of all, let's just get a sense of what that moment was like for you when you were sworn in, and what makes you the right person for the job. Perhaps let's start with you, Ms. Letlape.
Thank you very much, Mpolisi, and good morning to the viewers at home and to fighter Sanelisiwe. I think being sworn in as a member of parliament at such a young age, firstly, it was a vote of confidence from the EFF to say that we are now putting in young people in parliament so that the voice of young people does not fade in the process. So we are grateful that the EFF gave us this opportunity, but I think they also see the work that we do in the different communities. We grew up in the ranks of the EFF Students' Command, in the ranks of the EFF, and it is a great pleasure. I think more is that you know that now you've got a sole responsibility of representing young people at such a level, the highest level, the highest house of the country, which means that now as you put together laws and policies, you have a responsibility of putting the interests of young people first and ensuring that young people get representation in all spheres. So we are excited to be representing young people, and I don't think the organization that deployed me to Parliament could have done so if they were not convinced and they were not confident that I am the right candidate from all the other young people that I'm deployed with, and those who are in legislature as well. They are confident and they know that we put the interests of the young people first.
And Mr. Mkutu, let's also bring you in, if you may, perhaps also just, take us through your journey to the moments, maybe if days, years even, leading up to that moment when you were sworn in. Just take us through your journey, your day-to-day journey, as well as your day-to-day struggles that have led to this moment. Has politics always been the plan?
Thank you very much. From my school of thought, it's really not a question of personal achievement, but it's really an issue of collective existence within an organization called the African National Congress. I would have been part of the student movement. I would have been part of youth organizations within the Congress movement, existing in communities, leading young people and being part of the collective struggles of young people of South Africa. So I think that this moment really is an affirmation of the collective work that we've been doing in our communities, but also inside the African National Congress. And I think if you understand the process, it's branches that nominate members of parliament. And I think that confidence, not just to me alone, but to my peers who are also part of the 7th administration, who are serving as MPs, who are below 35, really it's an affirmation of saying that we see the collective struggle of young people, and we want to create space for them to participate meaningfully in the shaping of our own country. So I just think it's long been coming in the context of young people getting into positions of responsibility and their voice being heard in corridors of policy making and lawmaking, but also in general corridors of power. So really, for me, it's not a Lufefe issue, but it's a collective expression of young people of South Africa who are saying they are now represented in the 7th administration. My community, my peers, and those that I've struggled with, who I understand their plight in my own community. So really, I have not at an individual level kind of taken a moment to understand what it means for me personally, but I think I'm clear about what it means collectively for the constituency that I represent, which is young people and my community in general.
And I must say, it's quite inspiring that you also add that it's not a Lufefe moment, but we also cannot downplay the significance and the importance of the office that you hold a position in at this point in time. And also, just to bring you both back into the fold, last week we commemorated Youth Day as a country, and we heard the Deputy President there speaking in Polokwane about some of the grand plans that have been put in place to ensure that we empower the youth. I want us to listen to this clip quickly, and then I'll get some reflections from you both as we continue with our conversation. Let's roll the clip. All right, we're going to park that clip, but we will also be going back to it. But there was also another tweet that was laid out there on X. I think that was by Minister Kubai, if I'm not mistaken. Let's just bring it up and read from it and also get some reflections from you as well. So she said that, dear MPs and MPLs sworn in last week, please apply to universities to upgrade your qualifications, especially those with only matric. In 5 years' time, it will be the best thing you ever did for yourself. There is a bursary to support you to study. And let's speak about some of the support that is being made available to these new members of parliament, particularly you as new members of parliament. But also that clip, I'm told, is ready. Let's just get into it so we can get our reflections all in one go. Let's roll the clip.
Vote. You have spoken and given us all a clear message. You want us as political leaders to put our differences aside and work together to build our country and address the challenges affecting our people, but particularly the youth of our country. We are determined to put our differences aside and use our collective strength, skills, and experience to create the South Africa that the fallen heroes of the 1976 uprising fought for. In working towards achieving the National Development Plan Vision 2030, which aims to eradicate poverty and decrease inequality, we need to keep in mind that young people make up more than 2/3 of the population of our country, making them the biggest community in South Africa. Therefore, we cannot move forward without them, without the youth of our country. The National Development Plan places youth at the center of our country's development, correctly arguing that youth participation in our developmental initiative is critical to meeting our growth targets. As a result, we must include young people in discussions that influence their current and our future growth. We are all aware of the challenges that the current government and the current generation of youth face, which includes, amongst others, poverty, social inequality, poor mental health, and also high levels of unemployment. We are also aware that funding has been a challenge as a result of the administrative challenges or difficulties at the National Students Financial Aid Scheme, NSFAS.
And that was all last week at the Youth Day commemoration in Polokwane, and that is the, of course, the Deputy President Mashatile there speaking there this past week. And just to continue with our conversation now as we continue here, maybe let's start with you, Ms. Letlape. Just get your reflections on what was said there last week at last week's commemoration, but to also tie it in with that tweet that we saw there from the former Minister of Settlements. And I say former because we're still waiting on that announcement on the new cabinet. Just to hear from you, what do you make of some of the grand plans that are being put in place to ensure that you are supported as you get into Parliament, but to also speak about some of the grand plans that have been announced for the youth? Do you think this is enough? Let's hear from you first, Ms. Mkutu.
Unfortunately, Mkolisi, these are commitments and plans that we hear every year from the government. Every year, young people are promised jobs. Every year, young people are promised to be funded in institutions of higher learning, but none of those things change. And in fact, if you look at NSFAS, the budget gets cut. Students are still on the streets because accommodation has not been paid. Students still don't have food because their allowances have not been paid. So unfortunately, the Deputy President, what he said is nothing new. We've heard it before, we hear it every year. In fact, their speeches don't change. What also does not change is the lives of young people in South Africa. The conditions don't change. Young people still are unemployed. And there is no plan of how young people are going to be employed in this country. Not so long ago, even the president said to us, the government doesn't create jobs. So how do you then grandstand like that as a deputy president and say that amongst all other plans, we want to create employment for young people? 2/3 of the population is unemployed. And until today, there is no plan of how do you get young people employed. But you also can't get them employed because you are not giving them access to education. The doors of institutions of higher learning are closed for young people. Too limited to a point where even those who are in institutions of higher learning, once they complete their studies, they've got nowhere to go. So there is no plan. You can't plan to create employment if you have not planned on what happens to those who go inside the institutions of higher learning, what happens to them when they come out. So that is why you will not even have a plan of how you get another batch inside. So the fight of 1976, unfortunately, has not continued. The generation of 2015 fought for free education. Up until today, every year, January and February, we know we're going to find students on the picket lines because we're asking for one thing. Something that was promised in 1994, 30 years later, young people must still be on the streets. And then every time the government will make reference to 1976 because they've not done anything in their period of governing.
Yeah, and
so
Mr. Letlape
are
also...
those plans...
Yeah, just to cut you off there.
There is any intention of implementing them. But I also agree with the former minister that MPs and MPLs must go to school. Education is very important. We are even being led by people who have not even kicked the doors of institutions of higher learning. And that is very worrisome. So for young people such as ourselves, it is very important to go to school. And in fact, it is a priority. I know also in the EFF, you can't lead now if you are not engaged or you are not registered in an institution of higher learning. So education is very fashionable, and we truly do encourage everyone, not just MPs and MPLs, councillors as well. Now they've got a responsibility of going to school. Young people have got a responsibility of going to school.
Okay, and Mr. Mkutu, let's also get your reflections there. You heard Mr. Letlape says all this and all these announcements are just lip service. What's your take?
No, thank you very much again. Look, we as the African National Congress Youth League were the first ones just immediately after we were elected to raise alarm bells on the state of unemployment, particularly amongst youth. And we characterized it as a pandemic and as a ticking time bomb. And we said that serious interventions at the level of the economy need to be made to ensure that we stimulate our economy to create jobs for young people. And part of what we are saying as the African National Congress Youth League is that you need to reindustrialize our economy so that our economy has capacity to create jobs, particularly in the productive sectors of our economy. We're speaking around the issues of creating export quotas, to say that some of the minerals must be beneficiated inside the country, because when you export minerals, you are in actual fact exporting jobs. And we're saying that if you beneficiate those minerals inside the country, you are able to create the much needed jobs. And this view found itself in the manifesto of the ANC. It's not true that there's no plan to deal with the issue of youth unemployment. And I think the issue of reindustrializing the economy, particularly in the productive sectors of our economy, will create the much needed jobs in our country, particularly amongst young people. In relation to the issue of education, I think what my colleague Sharon is doing is throwing the baby out with the water. The reality is that the NSFAS has done much to intervene for young people who come from poor backgrounds to access universities, who do not necessarily have the financial muscle to access universities. Of course, there are administrative challenges, but it's not enough to say that NSFAS is a useless intervention by our government. That is why we have said that we've got to build state capacity to ensure that services get to our people efficiently and effectively. And part of building state capacity means that state institutions must have the people who are going to have the capacity to be able to do their jobs. That is why we're the first ones to say to the president and to the minister that the board of NSFAS is not doing its job, because if it was, you would not have an issue of young people in universities not getting their allocation, food allocation on time, book allocations on time. So you can't, because of those administrative challenges, make the point that NSFAS's intervention is a useless intervention. Of course, as the African National Congress Youth League, we are saying the ultimate end should be creating quality free education, not just in monetary terms, but also transforming the curriculum to represent the demographics of the South African society.
Okay, Mr. Mkutu, can I ask you that
the cultural dispositions of the South African people?
All right. If I can also perhaps just come in there, because it's one thing to say, yes, unemployment is a problem. Yes, unemployment is a ticking time bomb. But it's also another thing to do something about it, because I get a sense that every youth month, these are conversations we can just play and pause, you know, for the next youth month. But it's also another thing to actually do something about it, where you actually see all of this trickle to the ground where it matters the most. Let's hear from you, Mr. Letlape, and what your take on that would be.
Yeah, you're definitely right. I think, and these conversations are always put aside and spared for June, so that you repeat yourselves. What my colleague is saying here is not true, because he is from a governing party. That's the sad part. You can't come from a governing party and want to speak like opposition. It's worse now that he's defending NSFAS. NSFAS is a third wheel. So NSFAS is a middleman between government and institutions of higher learning. It's not just the issue of administration. When you start building state capacity, start with NSFAS first, so that students are not left stranded on the streets. But what we are saying also is that another thing that we are not agreeing with is indebting students and forcing them to sign agreements, which are loan agreements, and say immediately when you leave institutions, even if it's after 10 years, because chances are that you leave an institution now, you will only get employment after 10 years, hopefully when the government changes. You will still be indebted. You will owe the institution 100,000 rand that you have never seen with your own eyes. So these plans need implementation. And I think in this administration, this 7th administration, it should be a priority for all young people to go to their political parties and lobby them that, for instance, education, employment, we need to agree on it in principle. Who becomes a minister is something else. And it looks like currently that is the main focus. Who becomes a minister, which party gets what. But in principle, political parties should be agreeing on how many students are we going to take in this year? And how many students are we going to absorb in the corporate world immediately after they complete institutions? How many students, how many young people are we going to give jobs to? How many young people are we going to give land to so that they start farming? How many young people are we going to give funding to start their own businesses? Because that's what NYDA is supposed to be doing. And
All
it's
right.
currently failing to do that as well.
And to also bring you back into the fold, Mr. Mkutu, just on that very same breath, I need to take a branch of the leaf of what Ms. Letlape has just said right now. Quite of paramount importance as we're having this conversation is that we are hearing of some of those plans to empower the youth, but the reality on the ground is that young people are unemployed. We have nurses, we have doctors, as well as different professions as well that are sitting at home right now unemployed. As you take up this task, and we have young people also that are in jobs that are not really guaranteed for the future, such as in freelancing as well. Let's talk about how you're going to be championing this cause going into this very important administration.
No, I think of course, the main issue is that we would have all the good policies, but if the issue is around the capacity to implement these plans, you are good as nothing. And the point that we are raising is that the plans, particularly entering into the seventh administration, our role as young MPLs should be to create an activist parliament that will be able to provide rigorous oversight over the executive and to connect with our constituencies through the PCOs and to ensure that we create activism in communities and we're able to hold government accountable. My sense is that PCOs are quite an important platform for members of parliament, particularly youth MPs, to connect with their constituency so that more young people are involved in the process of policymaking, of lawmaking, but also of providing oversight and accountability to those that are in public office. But I do want to come to the point around the issue of youth unemployment, because I just think that you cut me off. I'm saying that the manifesto of the ANC in its priorities speaks about creating employment for young people because it is seeing it as a pandemic in our country and it's a priority to our government. That is why the matter of reindustrialization is on the table, is a priority, because we think that when you reindustrialize this economy, you are going to be able to stimulate the economy to create the much needed jobs. But another aspect is the issue of supporting youth enterprises. To ensure that you support them and they are able to participate in the productive sectors of our economy and the value chains that matter in the productive sectors of our economy. So it's not true that there are no plans. It's not true that there's no commitment. But our role moving towards the seventh administration should be insisting on the issue of implementing the plans that we have and the policies that already exist that seek to transform the South African economy, but also to create jobs for young people in South Africa.
But also, how do we make young people to also actively participate in all of this when there's so much red tape at times, when most young people can even tell you that there are so many barriers to entry in ensuring that they'll also enjoy some of the benefits of what you are talking about right now. So, but to also circle it back to you, Ms. Letlape, let's talk about how you will be planning to, spearhead the cause for the young person in South Africa to ensure that we have young people that are empowered here in the country, because the sense sometimes on the ground is that you have these young firebrands coming into parliament. They promise us that they will be championing our causes. They promise us that there will be something that will be done about the joblessness in the country. But a few days later, or maybe some 100 days later, when we track progress, they're still unemployed and they feel like, you're not in touch with the young people on the ground. What would you say to that, and your reaction be to that?
I think young people must take cognizance with the fact that in Parliament, 12 young MPs that are in Parliament now, even if they were to agree on something, if there's no majority to pass what has been put on the table, it goes back, and that's what young people need to appreciate. They need to appreciate the fact that if you don't have majority in that parliament, you will not be able to win on certain issues. And that is why some of the things you will raise them in portfolio committees, you'll raise them in parliament, and they still don't find light because the rule there, or the barrier between implementing and ensuring that there is actually implementation of these commitments is that majority aspect that comes in parliament. And I think that is what young people need to also know, so that as time goes by and they go and cast their votes, they need to understand that placing a political party in majority means that you are leaving everything that is going to affect you and society in their hands. But what we will be doing, what I will be doing personally as a young member of parliament, is to be a voice of young people. Speak, because we are on the ground. We speak to young people on a daily basis. We live with them, and they've got access to us. We are not members of parliament that must be spoken to through appointments and all of that. We are on the ground, and that is why we will be able to take their issues, take them up in parliament, tackle some of the issues. Some of them are going to be winnable, and some of them will, like I said, need a much bigger number or a much louder voice to be heard. But we also want to give young people access to parliament through us. They need to know that parliament is not some space elsewhere. It is the place where they need to be heard, and they can do that through us. For us to be voted in as members of parliament meant that we are now becoming servants of these young people. And it means the issues of unemployment, the issues of access to institutions of higher learning are going to be at the tip of our tongues every time we have to go and raise issues. We need to understand that we've got majority of young people who are left behind. And we also have a responsibility of instilling confidence in young people again, because young people have lost hope in police. They don't think that is why most of them will even tell you that they don't see the need to vote. We've got a responsibility to awaken that activism. We've got a responsibility to instill that confidence back, that in fact, you've got a voice, but this voice can only be heard if you do certain things. We also need to do a lot of educational programs where young people need to know the access to parliament, how they need to raise issues, and ultimately how their participation in politics have an impact in the livelihood of our people.
Okay, Mr. Mkutu, let's add your voice to it as well. What do you have to add on to the conversation?
No, I think in the 7th administration, I've seen quite a few young people as we're being sworn in. And I think that the diversity of views will be able to propel Parliament forward. I think young people always bring in a different energy and some sense of urgency that I think is much needed in the South African political space. And I think that young people and of course our organizations are beginning to open up to the voice of young people amongst their ranks. And I think that our responsibility is not to lose that voice, is not to be kind of co-opted into older generations and be the ones now that are more parliamentarian or honorable than people that were found in the system. So I think really we need to keep the connection between our constituents and the processes of parliament. And again, I'm saying parliamentary offices, constituency offices become a very important site, one of informing young people on the developments in parliament, but also on ensuring that we connect with the communities at the level of the ground. So for me, it's quite important that we maintain the youth voice, we maintain the voice of our constituents and the plight of our constituency, of course raising it within the context of parliament, policy making and lawmaking, because I think there's a lot of legislation, for instance, at the level of government that need to be repealed, that, as you are saying, are red tapes and so on and so forth. I think that part of the process that we should be engaged in as young parliamentarians is to look at the legislative pieces and see which ones can we try and advocate to be repealed so that we fast track some of the decisions that are meant to be implemented. And I think COVID has shown us that with coordination, decisiveness, a lot can be done in a short space of time when you remove the red tapes, the administrative red tapes. And by the way, these administrative red tapes, we've inherited them from the apartheid government, and they were not meant to serve the majority of South Africans. And I think those, we need to relook at those legislative pieces and be more urgent in terms of repealing them, so that we remove red tapes when we are going to intervene in the lives of our people, particularly young people.
Ms. Letlape, I know you want to get in a reaction there. I saw your response to Mr. Mkutu basically saying that, you know, some of these obstacles were inherited. What do you have to say to that?
It's very funny that they inherited some of these issues, and looking at the current situation or the current conditions now of government in national unity, they are now back with political parties, particularly the DA, that has more so advocated more on what the apartheid government used to be like. So I'm reacting to that because my colleague here says they've inherited these red tapes. Unfortunately, you are going to live with them now because they've decided to be in coalition with the DA, which is completely opposed to what the ANC has promised and has committed to the majority of the people in South Africa. So it's going to be very interesting how they are going to be united in government under the same cap of trying to liberate black people, while the DA is interested in just, profits and expanding the economy, but excluding those who are supposed to be contributing to the economy. So I'm very worried with the current conditions or with the current arrangements that unfortunately young people are going to be the ones that suffer the most. Women and children are going to be the ones that suffer the most. Black, poor people are going to be the ones that suffer the most. Students are going to be the ones that suffer the most because the DA has got no interest, particularly in ensuring that people get grants, ensuring that people get land and all of that. They want profit, and they want profit at the expense of our people. So it's going to be very interesting how the ANC is going to be continuing advocating for our people while
can I just come in, my
the
brother?
same bed.
So the thing is now we are out of time, so I'm going to give you just perhaps a quick 30 seconds to wrap it up.
I just need one.
Continue. Go ahead. Sure.
No, it's not. No, I think we must dispel the narrative that the ANC is in coalition with the DA. It's a government of national unity. It's a collaboration of different political parties because the electoral outcome has forced us to do so. I can't speak for the DA, but I can tell you now that the character and the outlook of the ANC towards transforming the South African society has not changed. But the material conditions we find ourselves in, by the way, if the ANC is the only organization that has the burden of being a leader of society, and it means that we must be responsible.
And that
if as the ANC would have, but you spoke, I kept quiet. If the ANC took a populist decision to just say we must just go with the wind, this country at this point would have been in chaos. But the ANC, because it has seen that it has a responsibility as a leader of society, it must take responsibility. It must ensure that there's stability in our country, and the government of national unity, after exploring many options, is the best option to ensure that there's stability in our country. All parties have been spoken to. All parties have the right to join, including the EFF.
All right.
To speak
so I have to thank you so much for your time, Mr. Mkutu.
Is really useless for me.
All right. Unfortunately, I have to leave it here because we are out of time. But thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. I so would have wanted us to delve deeper into the government of national unity and what it means, most importantly, for young people, but also why is it so important for the president to have young people in this new government of national unity. Joining us there was Member of Parliament Sharon Letlape from the EFF, as well as the ANC Youth League NEC, and Member of Parliament Lufefe Mkutu. Thank you very much there for your insights.